Hello, this is Fritz coming to you from Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And this is Maud coming to you from Southern Arizona.
And today we're going to do our second episode in our rewatch of the best of Star Trek, The Next Generation. Today's episode is Data's Day, which is the Next Generation episode, season 4, episode 11, first aired January 7th, 1991.
I love this show. Just the background is Fritz and I are both computer hacks, or former computer
Nerds,
hacks. So this show kind of appeals to us because it's as Data's Day, so it's obviously all about the AI and how that interplays with what it means to be human. So it's an exciting show.
Yeah, I'm glad you selected this one as one of your top 25, and I didn't remember it. I just know that I like all the Data episodes. There are quite a few of them, and I think I like them all, but I didn't remember this particular episode, and it's good because I watched it cold and I didn't read any of the synopsis ahead of time. So I was able to experience it, with the real flow, and what I anticipated was interesting. We'll get into that when we
go. And one more comment pre-watching or pre-reviewing is going into watching it. My concern was that it was going to be a show where, since it's called Data, it's Data's Day. I was concerned it's going to be just so beating you over the head about these subjects about AI, which have been, discussed ad nauseum through essays and things like that. And so my concern is that there's going to be just rehashing some of the same stuff that we've already both read and most people have read about AI and what does AI mean? Is it scary or whatever? And it turned out it was artistically done.
So the original idea wasn't AI focused. It was more about what's a day in the life on the Enterprise. And they decided, well, Data would be an interesting one because he's up 24 hours. So first thing I thought about is that this is really like Seinfeld before Seinfeld, in a sense that it's the entire show. It's almost a show about nothing in a way, except for in fact, it was pitched that way. But then the producer said, no, we need some conflict. And that's why the storyline about the ambassador was introduced. Initially, that wasn't even part of the original idea. It was going to be pure Seinfeld and pure or pre-Seinfeld with an emphasis on the daily, minutia. And it's about the small things. And it's also about communication and miscommunication. And the humor, a lot of the humor derives from this kind of interplay between, human communication or human android communication in this case. And also it has these interwoven plot lines, 3 plot lines that move in kind of an interwoven way and culminate in the finale, which is a very Seinfeldian type of structure.
Yeah, I thought that was a good point. And maybe because it was pre-Seinfeld, they might have been afraid to actually tell a story that way. Because I thought that was what wasn't. I didn't need the other plot lines. I didn't need any plot lines. I thought it carried itself well enough just with the situations, each situation independently.
There's 3 plot lines. The first plot line, the primary one, the premise of the entire show is that this is a Data's diary with entries from his activity on a particular day. Weaving in and out of this is the planned wedding between Chief O'Brien and Keiko. That's the second plot line. And the third plot line is that there's a guest on board the Enterprise, a Vulcan ambassador, a female Vulcan ambassador. I don't remember her name. Oh, Tepa. I think it's Tepa. Who is on a secret mission to contact the Romulans in the neutral zone. So this is a pretty good follow-up to Conundrum, our last episode, because we have yet another secret mission. Before we even decided to do this episode, we're talking offline about idioms and how Maud, living in the US, but knowing a lot of Arabic speakers, and me living in Brazil, knowing a lot of Brazilian Portuguese speakers, we both encounter cases where people who are trying to use a second language, oftentimes misconstrue idioms or create new idioms based on a faulty translation or literal translation, etc. And Maud said, "Hey, Fritz, you choose this episode," and I said, "Okay, let's do Data's Day," without knowing anything about the show, really. And then coincidentally, it has the core of its humor is really about idiomatic expressions. They're really the backbone of the humor in this particular episode. Do you agree?
Yeah, it was. They did idioms and also irony.
Well,
Both how it's so. I mean, because this is a difficult subject to distinguish what is the difference between a human and an android in terms of the backdrop. In another episode, like you said, was going to be rights, but in this case, we're just investigating it, and it's really hard to explain because I tried to do this once in an essay back in high school. Is what makes something funny. And, I think that when they asked us to do this essay, they just, what is funny? They wanted examples of what's funny. But then I was trying to figure out, well, what makes something funny and something not funny? And what makes something ironic or random? You look at something and you say, oh, that's ironic. The pure definition is when you say something and it's the opposite of what you mean. That's irony. I made a point in our last episode, our last show, that I found Star Trek humor cringeworthy when they try to be funny.
Right, when they try it.
When it's just part of the flow of a plot, they often use Data, they often use Worf to deliver humor.
Right.
I thought in this show, they deliberately tried to be funny. And in my opinion, they were successful at it. I think there were several very good points where this is actually really funny, especially for Star Trek, who I don't think usually is funny when they try to be.
No, agreed. This was well constructed, well written. And I think most of the jokes landed well. This one aged well, in my opinion.
With one exception, which is the same exception
from last week.
Episode. Yeah, it's the whole the part that doesn't age. Riker does not age well.
Oh, yes,
Riker's
correct.
Womanizing,
right?
Which they think is so funny.
Right.
After the Me Too movement is just,
right.
And especially how it played out in this episode. Riker is particularly Me Too-ish.
These are the themes that I've identified, and you can tell me if you agree and if you have any others you want to add. So the themes that I identify are outsiderhood, self-awareness, striving for personal growth, emotion as a core human trait, importance of friendship, and communication is subtle, complex, and often misfires.
The point about emotions is what makes people human. I thought that was a very strong theme. And the humor makes people human. But all of these are from the angle of has a non-human, which is why this show works, a non-human from the outside looking at examining what are. So this show to me was a non-human examining humans to see what makes them human. And then him trying to imitate it. And that's what makes it funny, is when a non-human tries to imitate being human.
Right.
But I agree with your list there.
Yeah, in some ways, Data is part anthropologist. He's like an anthropologist trying to be native, and relying on programming and adjustments to programming to be more native, to be as native as possible.
And missing it. And
occasionally
that's when you realize how important culture and context is to everything we do. If you're from the outside, you're going to miss all this stuff.
I mean, this is the grand theme of Star Trek, to be honest, is what is human and what are the good. I mean, to some degree, Star Trek is kind of a celebration of humanity. It's like an optimistic view of humanity. Now, we here on, March 3rd or 4th, 2022, with World War III possibly breaking out, we're seeing many of the worst aspects of humanity present still and going strong. And Star Trek, kind of is the antithesis of that. Star Trek is really always a kind of promoting humanity as an ideal, or promoting certain aspects of humanity as an ideal. And this episode, I think, is in some ways philosophically challenging. That's why I think it's always timely, because as an observer in the audience, oftentimes I'm thinking, well, are these assumptions of the writers that emotions are good and desirable really valid? I mean, this is definitely a bias, a human bias, that, our emotions are what make us human. I mean, that's the bias of this episode, and that, or at least certain emotions. And in fact, Data will go out of his way at one point to say, well, I don't know about anger and vengeance and something else.
Love,
But, so he's trying to avoid what he considers to be negative emotions, while at the same time pursuing what other humans think of as positive emotions.
Yeah, to reinforce what you're saying about the point of the show is, remember in the conundrum, that it started out by them saying, humans are superior to androids. That because there was a chess match between Troy and Data,
right?
And Troy beat Data in this three-dimensional chess game, saying that my intuition or whatever is superior to your number crunching. And so that reinforces what you're saying, is that they have a very positive image of humans that maybe in something that also didn't age well. Maybe back then in the 90s we had a much better self-image.
Yeah, although I think most humans even today still identify humanity with emotion, and right. I mean, I think that we as a
but is that a good thing?
Agreed. I think it's questionable. Most of our physical traits and behavioral traits tend to have evolutionary explanations, like functional explanations for why those things arose. And so it's natural that scientists would think, okay, well, why do we have emotions? What is the evolutionary value of emotions? And interestingly enough, the research that I'm seeing is still very ambiguous. So, for example, I'm looking at the Wikipedia page on emotions, and it identifies the following emotions: fear, surprise, disgust, happiness, sadness, anger, pride, shame, embarrassment. What do those emotions do to us physiologically? So like we get hot when we get angry, we get a higher pulse rate, our metabolism moves, etc. So we get all sorts of physiological reactions. In fact, that's what is part of the communication of emotion, right? So people,
would you define emotion that way? Would you define emotion as simply chemical changes in your body?
I think so. I mean, I think that the neurological chemical changes in the body are probably the response to the let's say response, but the heart, what's the physiological embodiment of the emotion is.
But is that all emotions are, or is there an awareness,
a platonic
component? Yeah, I don't know.
Well, we are aware, but I mean, we are.
But see, that's the difference. I mean, this is a pre-show analysis. Sure. I don't know how much of this could go after the show, but it's going to the heart of what the show is. But the one thing that I want to keep in the back of my mind as we talk about this, or keep in the back of our minds, is the issue of is data ever able to truly experience emotions? He says he's not, because you can trigger, let's say, Data can have the equivalent of a positive feeling by getting like a surge of electricity or something, or whatever, whatever feeds Data. If he doesn't actually experience that, if he doesn't actually experience pain, but simply understands pain, and can explain pain, predict pain, but doesn't actually experience pain, does any of that really matter? And the reason I bring that up, and if you want to comment on it now or just skip it, that's up to you. The reason I bring it up is I think that the core thing that connects humans to each other, as opposed to machines, is that we can't just describe emotions, we feel emotions, and it's tied down to the nerves, little cell nerves, is something we all share with each other and with all creatures. And so we have this thing we call empathy. What is empathy? Empathy is, for other living creatures, is when we see an animal in pain, regardless if it's an ant, we can empathize because that pain is a result of these nerve cells that we actually share with all these creatures. All the creatures of the world that we empathize with have nerve cells that we have. So when we see an ant in pain, even though we have no reason to empathize with an ant, we say, oh, that's a bad thing. And that's how I distinguish data. I don't know that I agree with so many of these conclusions about data. I don't see data as somebody I empathize with. I see him as a machine. So all through this show, you're going to see many attempts to make you feel for data, to make you empathize with data. And I'm tempted to do that, but I don't, because at the end of the day, I know he's just a machine. He doesn't feel any of these things.
I feel empathy with data. In fact, I was surprised that you said you don't, because I feel that our empathy extends beyond, I didn't think about it until now, but I thought until you mentioned this whole brotherhood of nerves, right, that we share with other organisms on our planet. But I thought that empathy is cued by other things, more, a perception of just the context that other being is in. So if we perceive that other being in
temptation.
pain.
I'm tempted.
Yeah,
sure, but I think it's an anthropomorphic. Does anthropomorphism just apply to animals, or does it apply to putting human traits on other entities?
Yeah, you could say.
So it could be a machine. I think it's manipulation by whoever is doing the show to make you think.
Well, why do you think we should be more? Why should we be more empathetic to an ant than to an advanced android like Data?
Let's just take the simplistic thing of pain.
Sure.
Right? An ant feels pain. An ant feels sorrow. And a robot can mimic those things, but they don't feel those things. So why should I care? Why should I care if you turn off a robot? What have you really done? If you can you cause pain and anguish to a robot? No, you can't. But you can to an ant, to maybe even an amoeba. For all I know, you can cause pain to an amoeba. It's very relevant because just within the past month or so, this study was undertaken in the legal system in the UK, where they had to produce a research to show whether lobsters feel pain.
Right.
Yeah, you're aware of it, right? And maybe I didn't realize how.
No, I'm not aware of the result, though. I know there are lots of. They did
the law. The result was not only did they find that lobsters felt pain, but to such an extent that there's, I believe, I don't know exactly what the law was, but they created a law that against boiling lobsters because of this research. It's like you're causing. As far as I don't know the extent of the law, I should read it, but that was the conclusion: is that basically we shouldn't be doing this because lobsters feel pain, which to me is really odd that people don't realize that. Why would you think they wouldn't feel pain? They have all these nerves. Of course, these nerves serve a purpose. They're bringing all this pain sensations to a lobster, and you're boiling them alive. So I think it's odd that humans sometimes empathize with animals that share our nerves, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes humans don't empathize with other humans. So there's a whole. So to deciding whether we feel that a robot deserves our empathy is an interesting question when we don't feel empathy for other human beings. As complex as data is, I can tell you that I personally feel far more empathy for an ant than I do for
Really?
data.
Huh. Interesting.
In spite of them trying to produce these emotions out of me, I just kick in and say, well, he doesn't really feel that. He's just got these bits that are, on and off. That's all that's going on there.
I'm a little bit ambivalent because I think that to some degree, biology is just biological programming instead of digital programming, instead of electronic programming. So,
right, but pain is an awful. I'm harping on pain because it seems to be easier for me to get my head around it. We can do the same analysis for love, anger, all that stuff, but just for pain, it just seems like a horribly unpleasant experience that I don't want others to go through.
Yeah,
and I can't say that about data. I don't care if they turn data off. Why you explain to me? Why would I feel sad if they decided to, in that one episode, which we probably should review following this one at some point, is why should that bother me if they decide to turn data off and reproduce another machine better than data? Why is that a problem?
Well, first of all, turning off is, I don't associate turning off with pain even for organisms. If I were to die at this moment, it would be the cessation of pain, not the experience of pain, right? Yeah. So turning off is
how could data doesn't even have a concept of pain? They've never shown.
But I'm saying it. I'm just saying that the analogy of the action of turning him off is not inflicting pain. I think the better analogy would be like to cut off his arm while he continues to maintain.
Has data ever expressed pain in any way?
No, but you asked what would be the loss. So the loss would be the accumulation of his experiences. As part of the show's point here is that data is more than just an initial state. He's a continuing, evolving state. And it's at any point in time, he represents a summation of the accumulation of all of his experiences.
So if you're looking at, I'll agree with you on that point. If you're going to analyze this in perspective of what is the loss to the universe, to the universe of data dying, quote dying, being turned off, you have a valid point. Is that there is a net loss to the universe by data, but I'm looking at it just in terms of data per se.
I understand.
If you just look at data per se, if he got turned off, that in itself wouldn't bother me. But it's the fact that, the world or the universe loses.
Right. But I think that you're just to be a devil's advocate here, but also I'm kind of representing my own perspective, is that I just think of emotions as biological programming. So our programming contains emotions, and those are basically evolutionary responses to environmental challenges, and they have survival advantages. They confer survival advantages historically in evolutionary terms. I would probably prefer not to have as much shame as I do, nor would I would also like to dial down my sensitivity to pain, which if I had my choice, if I could dial it down, I would dial it down. But we're the byproduct of millennium of evolution, during which the dials were basically adjusted in ways that were optimal for the survival of our species. Well, you know what this is like? We're basically emulating Star Trek. This is what we just did in Star Trek terms is the teaser. So this is a completely meta episode.
Which lasts 2 minutes in Star Trek.
Exactly. It cannot last up to 5 minutes. Conundrum was 5 minutes, and this one is 4 minutes. And so
we've
Star
been going
Trek,
how long?
We've been going a long time, but that may mean that we may just have to proportionally go even longer. Yep. We're now the show will really start. Now we're starting. We're starting.
So this is Maude from Southern Arizona.
And this is Fritz. in Sao Paulo.
All right, go
so
for it.
Data's on the bridge. He's turned over control to Riker. He leaves the bridge and he goes to visit Keiko, who's apparently this a new character. This may be her first appearance, but somehow she's supposed to be an old friend of Data's, and he's going to be the father of the bride. So this honorary father of the bride in the wedding that's going to take place today between her and Chief O'Brien, the transporter man. And Data says to himself, because there's an inner dialogue going on here, Data's diary, my friend Chief O'Brien often says that above all else, he wants to make Keiko happy. Since canceling the wedding will make her happy, I must conclude that the chief will be pleased at her decision. Now, I did this a little out of order. That's the key line in this segment. It happens because when Data visits Keiko, she tells him that she has cold feet and she doesn't want to marry. She doesn't really explain why. She just says she just can't go through with it. And Data says, well, that you're going to be unhappy if you don't go through it. She says, no, I am going to be happy if I don't go through it. I don't want to go through with it, and I will be happy if I don't go through with it. So Data.
Can we pause right there? And
sure.
Just, all right. So a couple of things happened there. One is you saw the first analysis of an idiom,
right,
where Keiko says, I have cold feet. And then Data's running through his mind through this program, says cold feet equals, I don't know if I want to go through with this. I'm afraid of doing this. So he's able to analyze by sheer memory, not through any real analysis. He just basically has a idiom dictionary, and he recognizes what she means by cold feet. And the other thing is, and Data is going to find this out, is, he bragged about saying, well, I now have a program that can predict people's emotions or how people are going to react by human emotions. And so she's telling him, and he's now taking it face value. I don't want to go through this wedding. And if I don't go through this wedding, I'm going to be happier. So he just runs with that at face value. Is that, okay, great. I want to make her happy. Well, it makes perfect sense. She needs to not do this wedding.
Right. So he's supportive because he thinks it's great. She's found a path to be happy. And as a friend, he wants to support that path.
So it's a good thing.
That's why I'm saying Data is the good faith actor, right? He's totally supportive,
Yes, but we're not going to get into why he's doing that, because he's doing it because this program told him to do it. Well, not because he has any good intentions.
The show is a little bit ambiguous on what he's learning as he's going and what he's looking up based on queries.
All right. So we left off with him thinking, well, she's going to be happy if we cancel the wedding. That's an awesome thing.
She's happy, and then here's his logic kicking in. He's saying, since Chief O'Brien says that his highest priority is her happiness, then Chief O'Brien should be ecstatic that she's canceling the wedding. And this is where this is where humor comes from. So when you were you said you have this interest in trying to explain humor, how humor works. This is a great example of how.
So why is that funny? Why is it funny?
It's the
so misjudged the situation.
Yeah, it's the what's it called? The usurpation of expectations, undermining of our expectations in a way that provokes a humorous response in us. So our expectation is that naturally this is going to be a problem, and that he's going to recognize that it's a problem, but instead he doesn't recognize it. He sees it as a boon, not a problem. So we were anticipating one thing, and we got something different, and I think that's where that's why it's humorous.
That's what's so complicated is you can't just say anytime you anticipate something and something happens different, it's funny. What makes some things that happen different, funny, and something nobody knows the answer to that question. And I think that's the next theme.
Well, comedians do.
I don't know if they know it explicitly. Can they explicitly describe what it is? They have a better sense than we do, maybe, of what is funny and what isn't. But can they put in words why something is funny and why something else isn't funny?
Right.
I don't think I think I'm having a hard time figuring out what is, and the show touches on this. I think it's the next scene
Oh, okay.
that he walks in on Geordi.
He visits, he goes to 10 forward. He wants to bring the good news to O'Brien. Hey, O'Brien, great news. Good news. I bring you good news. Keiko has decided to cancel the wedding, and that will make her happy. That ends the teaser. And then the credits kick in, and the voice of Picard comes on, and the great music, this Enterprise, Star Trek Enterprise music, fanfare comes on, and all that. And we hear the voice of Picard saying the mission to putz around the galaxy looking for life forms.
That's right.
So
every episode.
So Maude, this is a call out to Maude for creating what I think is the new unofficial mission statement from Star Trek, to putz around the universe or the galaxy looking for life forms.
Every show is about that.
Every show is about that. It's a great mission statement. In fact, that is our mission statement. That is the mission statement of the Fritz and Maude and Fritz channel, to putz around the galaxy looking for meaning. All right.
All right.
So that concludes the teaser, and now the show will begin.
Hi, this is Maude. I'm from
now the episode begins.
And this is Fritz.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Fritz.
All right,
So
Act 1. So Act 1, we get the first side, the new plot, the second plot line comes in, which is the Vulcan ambassador. Her name is T-Pell. She arrives dressed to the nines, and she arrives on the transporter room. Data greets her, and she pretty much blows Data off and says she wants to go see the captain, and blows past him with total disrespect. And then she goes into the bridge and then into the captain's room, and Riker observes all this, and Riker says, boy, and Riker says, wonderful woman, she's very charming. And Data perceives that this is irony, although he admits to not necessarily being a master of irony. He's kind of like an amateur in detecting irony. But this is such an extreme example that he succeeds in identifying it. Agreed?
Yeah.
So in this case, his irony detection program is working reasonably well.
Mm-hmm.
And then Data leaves, and he goes to the barber, where he wants to find Geordi to tell Geordi that the wedding's been canceled, because Geordi's getting his hair cut in anticipation of the wedding. And they're bantering with each other. They're trading kind of witticisms about how Geordi's saying the barber is not a great barber, and the barber saying, well, it's kind of difficult because you're not a great, they're kind of insulting one another, trading friendly insults as opposed to unfriendly insults. So Data wants to play. He wants to join the fun. So Data and Geordi says, Data, are you here to get your hair cut as well? And Data says, my hair does not require trimming, you lunkhead. And actually, I have to admit that one worked on me in the context of the show. I kind of did a laugh out loud.
Clarify, it wasn't part of the flow. It wasn't like they were all joshing and giving insults. They were joshing and giving insults, and then Data blurts this out, insults Geordi. It seemed what made it funny wasn't that it was just joshing with each other. What made it funny was just so out of place.
Yeah.
It was such a bad thing to say, and that's what made it funny. Not that it just fit in with everybody else.
Right. Well, and also there was the surprise of Data doing it at all. I mean,
Absolutely.
Data, doing using any kind of pejorative term was unanticipated by both us and Geordi.
But yeah, let's just touch back to what we were saying before, is that,
Sure.
we were saying that, okay, we can define humor, define irony, which is very hard. Irony takes a lot of intelligence to figure out how to do good irony, right? Because nobody can say exactly what irony is. We can describe it as saying something, the outcome is opposite to what you anticipate. That's irony. I can give you a million sentences that start one way and end the opposite than you expect, that are not funny. And nobody can explain, and this is why Data has such a problem. Nobody can articulate what makes something irony and what makes something just random juxtaposition of phrases, right? So why is something funny and why is something not funny? Why is something ironic and not ironic? Data, as complicated as his brain function is, can't figure it out. Humans can't figure it out. We cannot define in words, articulate, other than commonality. We can say, well, all things that are ironic have this in common, but things that have this also in common are not ironic. And, I don't know the answer. What makes something ironic and something just random juxtaposition of opposites?
Yeah, I don't know either. It's one of those things
That was the
it's like pornography. Right? You recognize it. You recognize it when you know it when you hear it, but you can't really define it.
The U.S. Supreme Court made that ruling.
I know. That's why I'm.
Pornography when you see it. So they couldn't define it.
So I'm saying, but that's what irony. I'm saying that's my response to you about irony. We recognize irony when we hear it, or but we can't. We have a hard time defining it.
Yeah, but that to me is taking the easy road, because there is something going on that makes something funny and something not funny.
It is, but are we going to answer that in this conversation? No,
we're not going to go into that, because I don't know I don't even know where to begin to answer that question.
It's a complex,
but I'm saying that there is a logical reason. There's some complex formula that our brain is going through to decide whether something is funny or not. It's just nobody's been able to figure out that formula. Right. What makes irony powerful, and this is what comedians probably do know explicitly, is taking things too extreme is when you make it funny. So the art comes in is to try to create an extreme instance of things. So if you're just like in the middle ground, it's probably not funny. But if you take something that happened and then you exaggerate it to an extreme,
get closer.
Yeah, when you exaggerate something to an extreme is when you hit the funny bone or the irony bone or whatever.
Agreed. Well, and that fits into this kind of idea of humor as tension and release. So the greater the extreme, the greater tension, and then the release can be explosive in terms of laughter. So now we're going to go on to the next scene where Data goes to get a present because Geordi had told him, hey, Data, you're going to need to buy a present. And Data's confused. Okay, what present is appropriate for a wedding? He goes to ask his kindred spirit, Worf. And this is a nice little touch where this is one of the, to me, pleasant aspects of this particular episode, these observations by Data. So Data, in his inner monologue, says that he considers Worf to be a kindred spirit because both of them are orphans rescued by Starfleet, and yet they are still both outsiders when it comes to humanity. And do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that an android would feel more in tune or empathetic to the character that's the most emotional on the show, and really didn't seem to like the most android-like character there, which was the ambassador. He seemed to not like her, but she was very logical. You'd think, well, Data, you should appreciate that because she's logical like you are. But he doesn't like her. He likes the guy who's the most emotional out of all of them. And so why is he the kindred spirit when naturally you'd think, the ambassadors who did everything through reason, theoretically, you'd think that would be more kindred to him.
He does say something to the effect that he normally feels comfortable with Vulcans because of their logic. I don't know if it was if it's coming up or whether it already passed, but he does say that normally he feels very comfortable around Vulcans. Or not. See, here's the problem with this discussion when we're talking in relation to Data, because we're using comfortable and like. You said he likes or doesn't like. Affection which is problematic when it comes to Data for all the reasons we got into earlier about whether he's really feeling affection or dislike for people. Data is talking to Worf, and Worf is advising Data on presence, and then he also gives his opinion about weddings, and he says that he's been to several human weddings, and they're full of talking, dancing, and crying. And Data latches onto the issue of dancing and thinks, oh, I need to learn how to dance. Now, Data goes off to seek Dr.
So this is
Crusher.
a good opportunity for a physical humor.
Correct, physical humor. So Data goes to Dr. Crusher, and she gets alarmed. She's like, how do you know? Why are you asking me about this? And he says, oh, I looked up your record, and it says you were championship dancer. And she says, well, okay, well, that's okay, but I don't want people to know about that because I don't want to be known as the dancing doctor. So she agrees to give him lessons, but says it's going to be on the sly. Nobody else should know. And she uses another idiom. She goes, lips sealed. And Data says, okay. So there's yet another one of our idioms, and Data's sort of trying to get with the program and internalize that, add that to his list of idioms.
You could tell that he was very deliberate when he did the lips. He was mimicking precisely her emotion. Right. It seemed a little bit awkward how he did it, but you could tell that he was mimicking Crusher.
Correct. All right, so they arrange to meet, and then the next scene is when Picard orders Data to perform the predictive analysis on the Romulan tactic and strategy. And that's where Data says that he's glad that he's not, he doesn't have emotional distraction. But here we have scenic irony, because as he's saying that he doesn't feel nervous, he notices that his finger is basically tapping distractedly, which is a visual cue when somebody is nervous. So the show is playing with us a little bit, and it's unclear to me, to be honest. It's kind of unclear whether they're suggesting that Data actually is sort of learning nervousness. He's clearly, the way it's shot, he's clearly aware of his finger, and he seems a little bit to be confused whether maybe I am nervous.
So yeah, he's programmed to fit in as much as possible to humans. So there's part of his program that probably figured out that humans in this situation would shake or twitch, whatever you want to call it. So he's mimicking human behavior. But again, I don't think he feels that. I think he's just mimicking appropriate behavior because he's programmed to fit in.
That's one possibility. The other possibility is that his programming is learning and evolving, and that this is like the first stage of early, nervousness.
But if he's learning, he's just learning how to
mimicry.
Yeah, just learning to do certain behavior. He's not learning to feel anything. He's just learning certain behavior in certain contexts, which is in this kind of a context, a human would be kind of shaking shivering physically or twitching physically. But I don't think he's learning any kind of feeling.
Okay. We'll see. Yeah. At this point, we have no evidence that he's beyond just mimicry. All right. So that ends that Act 1. Now, Act 2, Data enters the ready room to give his analysis of the Romulan strategy and to Picard and to the ambassador. And apparently the secret mission is that the ambassador is going to the neutral zone. The Enterprise is delivering her to the neutral zone, where she plans to enter negotiations or bargaining for contact with the Romulans. And Picard starts to mention that he has doubts about her plan, that he thinks that she needs an escort. So they're kind of very evasive because they don't want to reveal too much in front of Data, apparently. So because this is at this point only Picard and the ambassador know the details, and she rebuffs Picard and very arrogantly says, no, 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 I don't want an escort, and that's all I'm going to say, and I have the, it's my call. So now Data goes back to his quarters, and he feeds his cat named Spot, and he's petting Spot, and O'Brien comes in, and O'Brien and Data, and again in his inner monologue, he talks about how he tries to make his friends at ease when he perceives discomfort. So he's offering him a chair and a pillow and the drinks and food, and and this is again little subtle humor where he's
trying too hard.
He's being very motherly. Yeah, chicken soup and whatnot. The kind of chip. If he had chicken soup, he probably would have offered it. So he's trying to help O'Brien get through his dilemma, and O'Brien doesn't want any of it. O'Brien wants Data to talk to Keiko and convince Keiko to go forward with the wedding. And Data is initially resistant, but then he sort of rationalizes it and by saying, well, maybe she didn't do a thorough analysis. And if she did a sufficiently thorough analysis, she would realize that she really should go through with the wedding, and she will be even happier if she goes through the wedding than she will be if she cancels the wedding. So he's game to go and try to talk to Keiko.
Yeah, but why does an android have a cat? What does he get out of a cat?
There's a whole episode on that, I believe, but we're supposed to assume that I don't know. We'll have to go back to the episode. I mean, as far as what the show says, I don't recall because we haven't watched it when he first. I know he did it intentionally to try to become more, as part of his program, as part of his agenda to become more human.
Right, but it's also part of the producer's agenda to make you anthropomorphize Data. Because we just have this, anybody holding a cat or a dog or something, they just automatically give them more credit than they're worth.
Right.
So to me, that was disingenuous. It's like, because I keep going back to the point that I say my initial reaction will be always to feel sorry for, like, Hal. Remember Hal from 2001?
Sure.
Yeah. So at the end, I think everybody was kind of sad when he got dismantled, but it's the same thing. It's like they just played with our emotions. Either way, it's just a machine. So
that's funny because I didn't have that reaction to Hal.
Yeah, because I'm an animal lover, so maybe it influenced me more than it did you. But if
no. I'm agreeing with you on Data, but I'm saying
you didn't feel bad about dismantling Hal.
No, I perceived Hal. I don't recall feeling guilty. Or not guilty or even sorry. I mean, yeah, he was trying to appeal to our sympathy by saying, "Oh, please don't turn me off." But I perceived them as malevolent. So yeah, I was kind of in favor of it. I think I was in favor of him being shut off in that context.
Yeah.
Well, here's where I'm going to be hypocritical to some degree, because Hal is an artificial intelligence only, whereas Data is an android, which means has a physical representation. He has a humanoid body with an artificial intelligence brain, right? So he's more than he's an artificial intelligence plus a humanoid body, thereby being an android and thereby appealing more to my inclination to
irrationally so. I mean, why should a body make him
correct? I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you that it is irrational to some degree. Well, I mean, we haven't explored all the arguments, but one argument could be that it is irrational. And I would, if I wanted to defend it as not being irrational, I'd have to think about it for a while. But I do admit that it's Data's. Data, if Data were just a disembodied voice, if he were basically just the computer, because we have the computer on the ship, right? Which
Yeah.
is a super
Nobody cares about
intelligence.
it. If they turned her off, nobody would care.
Correct. And yet we do care about data.
And I'm
So
saying the cat is just one of those pieces. You know, you're
it
saying, well,
is.
the body makes me relate more to data. Well,
It
the
does,
cat
yeah.
makes you relate more to data. And I think it's all dishonest
It
to
could
make
be.
data more
could be.
appear more human, even though there's not a reason for it.
Yeah. Well, data states that there's a reason. It's data. I mean, we have to go back to that episode wherever he introduced Spot, but data, it was part of data's I want to be more human strategy. And humans have pets, and therefore
By imitating humans.
Yeah, by imitating.
He's imitating human behavior.
Yeah, but
to be more human.
Correct,
but it's an imitation. He doesn't. I don't. We will hopefully go back to that. But it's. I don't think Data wanted a cat. He wanted to be more human, and by having a cat around, he said, "Well, this will make me more human." I don't think there's anything in something like when the cat purrs. I don't know if you heard the cat purring. For a human, you know, it's been proven that it does. It has physiological changes when you hear a cat purr. It calms you down. There's lots of benefits that cats provide humans that don't exist for an android. So I think it's just pure mimicry. Yet it appeals to our heartstrings. Like, oh, isn't that cute? He seems more human to me.
Well, it does appeal to us. No, I agree. There's manipulation going on by the show writers, but there is also a plot point to him having the cat. It's not just a contrivance of the writers. It's also part of Data's character, that Data's character says he wants a cat.
It makes sense, but subconsciously it also benefits
it does. We agree. I agree with
show.
You. Of course.
The theme of the show is that Data is, and there's episodes about this, that like you said, you know, Picard was argued on his behalf that he has rights and stuff.
Right.
And I think it's having
we should go watch that episode based on your reaction to it.
Having the cat is one of those, remember we're saying how so much of what we believe is based on emotions that we rationalize. This is one of those things, this is the attempt of the writers to make us feel for Data. And then when we say, well, he's sentient, we're going to rationalize why we think he's sentient. And I think it's manipulation. I don't think he's
sentient?
I don't think he really cares about the damn cat. I think he wouldn't have got the cat if it weren't for the fact that it's what humans do.
So, well, I mean, but it's like an infinite regress. So do you think he doesn't want anything? Because he clearly says he wants to be more human. So are you saying that even that is not a want?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think that there's a very subtle message that may or may not have been there, but I read into it, is when Data and Dr. Crusher were dancing. Well, they were dancing, which we're going to get to. Trust me, they end up dancing. Where she says, where Crusher says, okay, now you lead.
Right.
I don't know if you're going to discuss that. Were you planning?
Go ahead. No, discuss it now.
So she says, you're going to lead. And he says, I don't know how. And that I think is an important point, is that when you're an android, you don't have mission. You have somebody gives you things to do. You don't just spontaneously decide to do something. Somebody has to direct you to do something. So for her to say, okay, you lead, kind of threw him for a loop, because he doesn't want things. That's wanting is the kind of thing that I'm saying androids don't do. They're programmed to do things. They don't just on their own decide what to do. Somebody has to tell them what to do. And in this case, when she says, you decide what to do, he didn't know. So she said, well, I'll have to show you. Remember, that's the next statement. Yeah, she says, I have to show you. So now he can mimic what it means to lead while you're dancing. Because on his own, he can't just spontaneously want to do something.
Agreed. But I would counter that by saying mimicry is a form of learning that all of us undertake from from birth. In fact, there's a whole school of philosophy. I don't know if it's a school, but there's a guy named René Girard, a Frenchman, who does this an interesting book or series of books the one I read was called Violence and the Sacred. And I think you would enjoy reading it as well. But the core of his entire philosophical position is how mimesis is kind of at the core of human interaction, and that a lot of it, desire is based on mimesis, meaning we see people with a Lexus and we want a Lexus. We see people going to the gym, we want to go to the gym. We see, so most of human desire, and more than desire, I mean, it's a much deeper, his sort of use of it's like the core idea in his philosophy is mimesis and the importance of mimesis.
That makes sense to me. So like what you're saying is when Data didn't know how to lead, but then she showed him how to lead,
then he learned,
and then he could lead in another context. You're saying humans did the same thing, is that humans when they're born really don't know how to lead or anything, and then they see other people doing what we perceive as doing something spontaneous, and we can correct me if I'm wrong, but we can basically mimic spontaneity.
Basically, okay, spontaneity is a question. I mean, we certainly can learn, we become socialized and we learn behaviors, and we learn the behaviors that are specific to our cultures. We don't learn all human behaviors, they're all human, right? We learn those which are specific to our culture. So in some degrees, we're programmed into we adapt into our culture. So we have programming to learn, and then we're put into a culture. So we learn that culture and we mimic that culture. And now your question is, do we then become, is our spontaneity going to be fundamentally different than Data's quote unquote spontaneity?
Right.
And that's a question. You're claiming it's not. I mean, yeah, it's a good question for robotics, kind of.
Well, it's a question that goes to also free will, right? It's like, how much.
But we had this discussion about free will earlier, that there's a school of thought that says it's all a bunch of storytelling on top of deterministic behavior.
Yeah, right. That we've learned to do whatever it is that we're going to do. And it's not, we don't freely decide to do things. We're just doing what we've learned.
So in that case, spontaneity, there is no spontaneity.
There's no such thing.
It just,
we just learn to behave in a certain way that may appear to be spontaneous. But it all goes down to the point of, I think you made a very valid point. It's all about wanting. And the fact that, it appears that Data has a hard time wanting something. And your counter argument basically to that is humans have a problem with wanting things, that they learn what it is that they want. And there's evidence to support what you're saying, because different cultures want very different things. Right. And if it's just all internal, it would be we'd be across the spectrum in every culture. People would want different things, but within different cultures, we want the same things.
Yeah, and that's where, I was saying that's where mimicry comes in. Because you've been disparaging mimicry, and I've been accepting that to some degree, like as mimicry is a lesser behavior, less valid, if you will, less authentic. But then as you were talking about it, I recalled that that mimicry is in some philosophical circles, mimicry is the core aspect of being human. So,
right.
But I do want to grant you one thing, though. I mean, I will grant you that there still could be a difference, which is what I thought you were saying, was between pretending to want something and really wanting it. Meaning that because Data clearly claims to want to be more human. So that's why I was saying this is an infinite regress, because you said he wants to learn how to lead, he wants to dance, he wants to lead, and you're saying he really doesn't want these things. And then I said, okay, well, what about his stated want to be more human, which is kind of his prime, if you want, his almost prime directive, or his primary want. And I'm saying, are you are you denying that that's even a real want?
No, I'm saying everything is programmed, right? So,
Yeah.
so he doesn't feel a need for something. He's programmed to need something or want something. So that's how they're different. He's different than a human. A human wants something based on an emotion that either they're feeling pain and they want that cessation of pain, so they want less pain, or the opposite, that they want some sort of pleasure, that just, it's they're fulfilling some emotion or addressing an emotion. So that drives what we do in our life. We create our mission every moment based on what our wants and needs are. And I don't know what Data's wants and needs are. He can have a like you said, a prime directive that informs everything he does, but it's not based on emotion. It's based on what he was programmed to do.
So, well, what do you think Data does when he's in his quarters alone?
What he's programmed to do. So his program may be to do some diagnostics on his brain, to run some kind of procedures in his brain, whatever those procedures are. But I don't think I think that's all predefined. I think somebody wrote what he should do.
Well, there's no way they wrote it in the programming sense that you and I are familiar with.
Not it's an AI thing, right? So yeah. What was written is,
but AI is a black box. You know that, right?
Yeah, I mean, so what was written to Data was, I mean, maybe if we thought about it, we would know better, but it's to constantly improve and learn, right, and just be positive influence on the world.
So what's wrong? So how is that inferior to our programming, which is to eat and sleep and defecate and
we think
learn and then learn other motivations based on our peer through mimicry.
We think our value, right? We think our value as human beings is that we decide to do good things.
Yeah, we
right?
think, or we
Data's
rationalize
not deciding.
That.
Yeah, well, we do rationalize it, right? But that's our perception. So maybe, but see that you're arguing a very odd thing. So I thought we were going to get into an argument about Data is as good as humans who are deserve rights, and it just keep going back to you're saying no. Humans are they're not worthy of rights because they're just machines.
Right. Agreed. I am taking that argument that maybe we're just the benefit. I mean, it's like that because I've seen this kind of, you could say we're the deterministic result of DNA from, from the original DNA just evolved deterministically over billions of years.
If there's no free will to give somebody credit for doing a good thing, if you're saying if it's all learned behavior, cultural, whatever, there's no free will involved, then there's no such thing as a good person and a bad person. You'd have to take each person, and if let's say they're a murderer, and say, well, you can't blame them. That's not a free choice. They were, it's just their programming to do whatever it is that they did. So
I got the perfect show for you. Not show. The perfect. I can't believe I didn't think of this earlier. The perfect response for us, or perfect target for us. Look at some of the lectures by a man called Professor Robert Sapolsky. So Robert Sapolsky, he's a neuroendocrinologist, researcher and author, professor of biology and professor of neurology and neurological sciences at Stanford University. And he has he's written a wonderful book that I've read. And he also has a series of online lectures that he delivered to his class in Stanford, where he goes into a lot of what we've been talking about, or we've been skirting the edges of interface between biology and behavior. And he even, and the reason you cued me to remember him when you talked about criminals and whether criminals should be held responsible for their actions, or are they, if we accept that we don't really have free will, then why should we punish criminals if they're, if they're just if they're just reacting to their
You
programming,
can
if you will,
incarcerate them, but for
Right.
purposes of,
without blaming them, without
you can incarcerate them for purposes of safety,
right.
but not in order to punish them.
Correct. And he sort of moves in that direction. I think I haven't watched the full course, but he starts to mention that, and he's worked in that area. He's been like an expert witness for in legal cases, criminal cases. So I suggest that we do so, and I think you'll love what he's talking about, because he talks about, he specializes in primate behaviors. He started out as a biologist observing baboons, and baboons are, as we know, a highly social animal. So they have they have incredible social cues and interactions, and he observed them, but he also observed their biology. So he observed like what's happening with them neurologically and chemically and hormonally, through the course of their days and lives, and how that can be extrapolated to in terms of human behavior and human experience. So put that on the table. We
Okay.
make a note that we are going to watch Sapolsky and come back to some of this discussion as well. Data is also going to go to see Keiko and try to get her to do a better analysis of the
Right.
situation. So he goes to see her and he says, I want to help you. I'm your friend. And she's like, what are you doing this for? You're annoying me. Get the hell out of here. I don't want to get married. I said I don't want to get married. I'm really upset. And she's really upset. And Data is like, without any, he's well-intentioned, but obviously doesn't know how to handle this extreme emotion. So he leaves and he goes to Dr. Troy, because he says, well, I obviously need the advice of an expert. And Dr. Troy, is she a doctor? I can't remember. Diana Troy. Anyway, he needs Troy's
Counselor.
Counselor
Yeah,
Troy.
I don't
He
think they
needs-
ever call her.
Yeah, counselor.
Mhm.
He needs Counselor Troy's advice because she's an expert in emotion. Her whole thing is empathy, and she is an empath. She's a half human, half empath, whatever. So she's like the inverse Data, if you will,
Yeah.
which is interesting. This is the first show that I remembered thinking this. I mean, I watched the entire series of the Next Generation back when, and I don't remember ever coming to this kind of insight that Data and Troy are kind of like inverted beings. That one is the extreme emotionally sensitive being, and the other one is the extremely logical being.
Except that Data's striving to be
Correct.
more like Troy, and Troy is perfectly happy being
Exactly.
completely empathetic.
Exactly. That was my other observation, is that it's asymmetric because of that very reason. I wonder why. It could be that somebody could say, well, Troy is already sufficiently logical in her own mind. Because she's not only empathic. Somebody could say, well, she's as logical as everybody else, plus, and but just with like empathy at 20, whereas our empathy stops at 10. She's got empathy up to 20.
That's true.
So they could say that but I agree with you that you had the same observation that I did, that she's not striving. Although that could be also, because that could also indicate a bias on the part of the show creators to not recognize that asymmetry, and it's a reflection of their bias towards favoring emotion as the more important aspect of humanity.
Correct. Yeah, I think it would be a step down for Troy to be more like Data.
Well, you think that, and the show obviously thinks that.
Yeah, no, that's what I meant. I'm not saying I think that. I'm saying how they.
But I think you think
show.
that as well. You're sort of suggesting that.
For her to be more like Data, yeah, I kind of do admire Counselor Troy.
All right, so Data explains a predicament with Keiko and O'Brien to Troy, and Troy says, look, Data, the best thing to do in this situation is leave them alone and let them work it out on their own. And so that's her advice. And he then goes, so he takes that advice, thanks her, and leaves. All right, we now switch scenes to Data gets called into the ambassador's room, and the ambassador, and this is, I thought, a very interesting scene, because the ambassador, T-Pei, the Vulcan ambassador, as you pointed out earlier, she's a Vulcan, and you would think that she would, and Data would feel like they are sort of
kindred spirits.
Kindred spirits, exactly. Thank you. Kindred spirits, because of their shared valorization of logic over emotion.
Yeah.
And yet she is totally dismissive of Data. She's like you to Data.
Mm-hmm.
This is interesting to me, right? Because she's obviously doesn't respect Data as a sentient being.
He's just a machine.
She treats him as completely a machine. Now, okay, so why do we? Well, I'll pause on my challenge here. So she treats Data as a machine, and to the audience, to someone like me, this is arousing sympathy for Data and anger at her, because she's clearly treating somebody I like and the audience theoretically likes with contempt. And she basically says, "Hey, Data, I'm going to give you a code and access code, and you're going to reveal some classified information to me, as you should." Mm-hmm. And she gives him the classified the code, and he says, "That is a valid code, and I will give you the information if you want it. But I do have to warn you that I will report this to. If you do access the classified information, I will report that to the captain as per protocol," which then scares her. So she says, "Oh, no. That's good. I'm just testing. I'm testing your protocol, and you passed the test, so that's good." And he leaves. And at this point is when now the show begins.
Okay, this is Mod.
This is when he actually brings up the point you wanted to talk about in the teaser. Yeah. He says, "I must believe the ambassador," because he's questioning whether that last bit about it being a test was actually true or not. Right. And he says, "Well, she's a Vulcan, and Vulcans never lie. Therefore, I must accept her explanation that this was just a test, and therefore I don't have to tell the captain anything." He doesn't say it, but that's the implication. Yeah. He says, "But at the same time, I wish I had a gut feeling,
easy feeling
to validate this," because which suggests that he's not 100% convinced that he is. So in some sense, he is having a gut feeling. He's having a gut feeling
Yeah, he's having intuition. So he has this mathematical formula that's analyzed what just happened and saying, "Oh, there's 99 based on this input. She's a Vulcan. This is what she said. There's a 99.9% chance that she's being honest. But there is this little 1% chance that something is wrong." But I think what's going on in his head is like, everything adds up, but there's a little bit that doesn't add up, and I'm not sure what to do with it. And I'm going to leapfrog in the plot, which I'm not going to explain, but this is where I think his whole learning about Sherlock Holmes comes in, right? Where he says, what do you do if you're Sherlock Holmes and things don't all add up? Things kind of add up, but they don't all add up. Data doesn't know what to do. And so, go ahead. At this point, he's uncertain what to do.
Continue your Sherlock Holmes story if you want.
Right. So what Sherlock Holmes says is, if you've excluded everything that's possible, anything that's left over, regardless of how improbable it is what you need to look at as being what happened. Right. So if you exclude what's impossible.
Let's look at the quote.
Right. So right now he has this problem is that he's got this doesn't quite all add up. So like, why did she do this test? What right does she have for doing this test? It's out of nowhere. So that doesn't fit anywhere. But he says, but Vulcans don't lie. And so she must not have been lying. But it's not that they don't lie. There's some improbability there. in that statement, that she wouldn't lie because she's a Vulcan and Vulcans don't lie. Well, so I don't want to jump ahead, but in that one statement, there is something that he's taking as being a fact, which is really just a probability, even though it's highly improbable. Later on, he's going to study Sherlock Holmes and says, well, reevaluate that. Reevaluate what you think, what you just assumed to be a fact, which was really just improbable, not an absolute.
Right.
Anyway, so that gives you the context of why he's uncertain. It's like something's not adding up with what just happened, but he doesn't know how to deal with it.
Fair enough. Now, I would also take that opportunity to say, to go back to my jujitsu move, which is to say, how is it that our intuition, so to speak, is anything other than our processing arriving at this kind of, an interaction between various levels of processing. We have our conscious level of processing and our subconscious levels of processing going on. And Sapolsky would come on and say that this is all that, our idea of intuition is really just various levels of the brain exchanging transmitters that are triggering, other subroutines that are then generating hormones, and the hormones are creating stress in your gut and physical reactions that you then interpret as intuition.
I'd probably be in that camp, which is why people say, well, you ought to listen to your intuition, listen to your gut, which is where all these hormones are playing out. I think what's going on is, that there's these very complex subroutines going on in your head that are that are communicating. I think you put it really well, that they're communicating to your conscious brain through these hormones, like, don't go there. It's like, well, there's no reason not to go. Well, and then something bad happens. You say, see, I knew it. I knew I shouldn't have gone there. And it wasn't just some non-physical thing going on. I think it is your subconscious being operating at a much higher level because of all this parallel processing that can go on in your subconscious, that it's come out to the conclusion that you shouldn't go there, but it can't put it into words because it's not conscious. So like you said, it communicates to your conscious brain through your gut. And sometimes you don't listen to your gut, and maybe you should, because your gut is not just some random thing. It's probably your subconscious mind running these complex analytics and coming up with this conclusion. So I'm agreeing 100% with what you're saying. Is that intuition? So that's again, it's the same argument we seem to always be making. You're not making the argument that data is more human. You're making more arguments that humans are more like data, that they're more like androids.
Yeah.
And when it comes to
I'm saying that humans, that viewed from another direction, you could say that humans are more programmed than we are not. So now we go to Act 3, and there's a very long scene on the holodeck where Crusher is teaching Data how to dance. They go through tap dance, and he becomes an expert at tap dance right away. And then she thinks they're done, and he says, "Oh, now I'm going to go to the wedding," which leads her to say, "What? There's no tap dancing at weddings, so I got to teach you."
He said there's not usually tap dancing. I thought that was weird. It's like there's never tap dancing at weddings.
Yeah. There's ballroom dancing. So then they begin ballroom dancing, and then she is and that's where we wind up going, as you were mentioning earlier. They foreground his kind of the way he learns is through mimicry, and that he needs to watch her feet. And then she tells him to lead, and he's like, "I don't know how to lead." And then she says, "Well, watch me, I'll lead, and then you'll learn how to lead." And then he does learn how to lead, and then they start dancing. Go.
I was just going to say is that I've realized how unsophisticated my sense of humor is, because the slapstick and physical, slipping on a banana humor, really I found funny. Like one of the funniest scenes, there's two funny scenes. So this whole show had a lot of humor theoretically built into it. The two funniest pieces of humor that I saw in the show were in this dancing scene. One of them was when like you were saying, the Data's trying to learn to ballroom dance, and so he ends up looking at their feet so he can mimic what she's doing. And then she says, so she says, "Okay, look up now." And he looks up into the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously, when I retell it, it's not funny, but when you see the scene,
I laughed when it happened as well.
Yeah, because it was just such a Data thing to do. It's like, no, look at me.
Right.
Don't look up into the sky.
Right.
And then the thing, that the other one that was just really funny was when they were, it's the very last part of the scene was they were dancing, and then like so Crusher has to leave because there's somebody's having a baby. So he ends up creating the I don't know if it's in a holodeck, but the computer creates an image of a ballroom dancer. And so he starts dancing he starts dancing with the ballroom dancer, right? So she's got her face to you.
Well, what does
she's
she
this
look
really
like? Hot
looking mama, right? So she's this hot babe dressed really slinky, and so they're dancing with her face to the camera.
She's got like a mermaid dress on, practically.
She's just amazing looking. So as they're turning, all of a sudden you see Data's face, and he's got this huge smirk on his face,
like, as large as a pumpkin. Really, he's got like a smile, like a
big smirk.
Yeah, like we would say rictus. He's got a smile as wide as a Halloween pumpkin. Yeah, and his eyes are open and everything.
Yeah, it was a good photography. How it just suddenly, all of a sudden, you come from seeing his back.
Right, they turn.
See this, they look perfectly normal.
Right.
And then they spin around. The camera stays stationary. And all of a sudden, you see this huge grin on this guy's face.
Yeah, and it worked well because of the setup. The music was kind of this romantic, calm setup and elegant. It was like elegant moment, and then it devolved into like a Charlie Chaplin moment. All right, so now continuing with the synopsis. When the synopsis is done, do we start the show? Correct.
Is that when we start the show?
Correct. Captain and the ambassador and the Romulans arrange for the ambassador to be beamed over to the Romulan ship. So, but it's supposed to be that the Enterprise beams her over to them, to the Romulans. So they send her to the transporter room. And
well, did you say? I think you need to tell them why. Why are they sending her over?
Well, she's supposed to go to meet the Romulan representative and have some kind of face-to-face conversation, I believe, right? About defusing.
Yeah, they're
tension.
Negotiating some kind of big peace.
Yeah, or de-escalation. They want to negotiate de-escalation. They don't show it. They just have the people on the bridge hearing a communique from O'Brien and the transporter saying, I'm transporting her, but there's a problem. I'm trying to get her back. I can't get a fix on the pattern. She's gone. She's dead. So
all that's left is this lump of meat. Where she
it was like a few grams of organic matter. Right. So they eliminated all the possibilities of malfunctioning and equipment. And then they looked at the genetic material and found it was not equivalent to her genetic material. So they concluded that she had actually been pulled by the Romulan transporter system, that the Romulan transporter got in there milliseconds before the Starship transporter system engaged, simulated the effect of the pattern that so that O'Brien was convinced that the fault was on his end, but in reality, instead of being pushed from the Enterprise, she was pulled by the Romulan ship, and therefore she was over there.
They pushed that lump of meat.
And then they left a little bit of genetic material as their kind of cover up. So now we go to the final act, and then the show will begin. So the final act is when Data explains his hypothesis to Picard, and Picard agrees that that's what happened, and Picard is angry and feels that they've been duped by the by the Romulans. At this point, Picard still thinks that the ambassador is a real Vulcan. So Picard ordered. Now, this is another one of these like moments where they do an inner monologue of Data observing his environment, and Data says, Data's calculating what the captain will do. And this is interesting because this means that this is what Data is doing all the time. All the Data's probably constantly
probabilities of what people are going to be doing.
Yeah, right. So he's probably constantly analyzing the captain. And so he says the safest and most logical decision in this situation is to contact Starfleet and await further instructions. However, based on past experience, I project only a 17% chance that Captain Picard will choose the alternative.
Yeah.
Will choose that alternative.
Yeah, at that moment that this thing is going on in Data's head, Picard hasn't decided what he's going to do yet. You see Picard in the background, basically contemplating quietly. What am I going to do when Data already knows what he's going to do? This goes back to your determination. Is Data already knows pretty much what Picard's going to do. Picard has no idea what he's going to do yet.
Yeah, and well, he's got thinks of it in terms of probabilities. But I thought he
doesn't know for a fact, but he says, I think I probably this is what he's going to do, and Picard's in his own mind just trying to figure it out.
So, but so he basically, but he says he's the irony perhaps, the humor here to some extent is that he only gives Picard a 17% probability of following the most logical path. Which means that the corollary is that Picard is highly improbable or highly illogical.
Yeah. It goes back to what it is that he was going based on his, I thought that was really an important moment. So I'm glad you're taking time to explain that moment because it was extremely well done, acted. Because you could see Picard contemplating what to do in silence. Like this is a critical moment for everybody. Everybody could be at war in moments, and Picard has to decide what to do. And there's silence while he contemplates what goes. So there's a moment. It's not a moment. It's a long time hesitation about what's going to happen next. And then the beauty of Picard is that once he made up his mind, once the gears moved in his head and he said, this is the proper course of action. What makes him a great leader is he committed 100% to that decision. He wasn't wishy-washy at all. As soon as that decision was made, when everybody's kind of just standing around, he makes the decision, which is, I'm going to still telling the plot. He makes other than he decides to do something, right? He dives in and says, you do this, you do that, I'll do this. Everything just goes into full speed, fully committed to the direction that he's decided to go, which, as you pointed out, was all based on intuition. It was not based on logic. He went counter the logical thing to do, which is tell your superiors what just happened. He does something that his intuition tells him to do, and he commits 100% to his intuition.
Or he does, well, it's either intuition or game theory, if you will. Like he may have his own
whatever calculation he went through. And we said intuition itself maybe.
I didn't say intuition. I'm glad you mentioned intuition. I omitted the word intuition unintentionally. And then, but I'm thinking I was also thinking it was his intuition.
In our conversation, we're saying even intuition could be just game theory done on a played out in a subconscious level. Either way, I mean, some calculations went on in his head, but the point I was going to make was whatever conclusions he came up with were a probability and were probably iffy, whatever decision he came up with. Yet he knew that he had to commit to it. If it had any chance of succeeding, he had to commit 100% to it. And he went all out. I mean, that was really courageous.
Right. So it's basically a good demonstration of, well, it's an echo back to the intuition versus logic from Conundrum. And it's also example of good leadership in terms of the commitment to the action once it's made. All right, so they go to red alert, and they basically charge after the Romulan ship, and Picard challenges them and said, "Hey, give us back our ambassador. She's a Federation citizen." And then the Romulan says, "There is no Federation citizen on our vessel at all. I guarantee you that." And then Picard said, "Well, I'm not leaving without her. I'm gonna, and the Romulan said, "Are you willing to risk, basically an intergalactic war over this one person?" Because fortunately, I'm not. Fortunately for everyone, I'm a captain that won't start a war at this point. I'm going to reveal to you that the ambassador is not a Vulcan. She's right here next to me. She's a Romulan spy, and we duped you basically. But we're not violating. We're not abducting her. She's here willingly. At which point, Picard is sort of a little bit ashamed to learn that he was duped. And he says, "Okay, well, that's cool." So they decide to part their ways. So the wedding goes forward. Everybody's happy. Then Picard and Data have a little tender moment because there was a baby born to one of the other ship members, and Picard, as the Papa Picard, goes to check out he's not the real father, the ship father, if you will. He goes to check out the baby, and Data and him look at it. And again, this is where I'm a big fan of Patrick Stewart, his acting ability, because he conveyed everything by just internalizing. And again, this is consistent with the show, though, today's theme, which is emotion. So he's clearly has emotion. He says, he's like, isn't it amazing? Here we were on the brink of the apocalypse, if you will, and yet this new child was born, and we'll begin a whole new journey. And you can see he's filled with this kind of mix of emotions, but mostly, I don't know how you would characterize that particular emotion, like affection. Obviously it was affection, and hope, perhaps, for the future that this child would have. But it's clearly, but it was all, he was not acting out, he was acting in. And we, as the audience, are reading the subtle muscular features on his face, and we read that, and then we feel that. So again, here we are with mimicry in some ways, right? He's feeling it, and his biology is expressing it in a very subtle way. I mean, and then yet it's powerful. We are such powerful observers of other people's emotions that we're able to read it and also feel it ourselves. Right?
But we're saying in our show, we're saying it's more than that. It's happening on us. You're saying it's almost intentionally. We are able to. And what's happening is not that. It's not that we are deciding to. It's that it's happening subconsciously.
Yeah,
right? I know you meant that.
Yeah.
But the wording is important, because this whole conversation between us has been about how so little of it is us being able to or wanting to, but it just happening subconsciously. And just an example to reinforce what you're saying is the same happens with humor too, is something's just not funny, but then why do they have laugh tracks? Because when you see 20 people laughing, all of a sudden it's a lot funnier. I mean, they've obviously did a lot of research on this, or they wouldn't have laugh tracks in all those 70s shows and 80s shows. It's because if we see people laughing, all of a sudden we feel it's funny. I'm wondering how you would analyze this. You may have seen that. I think it was on YouTube or something. They showed of how our views on things change based on how people around us perceive it. That they cue us to feel whatever we feel. Also, again, none of this is intentional. This goes again, shows the danger of propaganda. None of this is intentional. We don't intentionally decide something is funny or not funny because other people are laughing. Subconsciously, when everybody's laughing, it seems funny. But there's this example on YouTube. I saw a show where they had this guy. It was at a big like Woodstock kind of a concert, and some crazy dude was just standing, just got up and just started dancing, and everybody's
I
like,
saw it.
Yeah, it was like, what is this crazy guy doing?
He's off on the far edge of the slope.
He looked like a crazy guy on drugs. Everybody you'd have to think this guy's a crazy guy.
He's like shirtless and
just like
shoeless,
flailing away like an idiot.
Yeah,
he was like an idiot. It's like your impression of him is this guy's a real idiot. He's whacked out on drugs. And then like a couple more of his friends got involved.
Right.
It was like, okay, it's a group of idiots.
Right.
And then it just grew, and then everybody's dancing, and
people ran over there. He was on the perimeter. This is so
awesome. He's like the best concert ever. I wish I was at that concert.
Yeah.
And just a minute ago, you're saying this guy's an idiot. And so this is all subconscious.
He was like a pebble that created an avalanche.
But it just goes to show our whole life is like that. It's like we have these emotions that we don't know where they come from. We feel this guy's an idiot. Is he objectively an idiot? Well, obviously not. 2 minutes later, you decided he wasn't an idiot.
Yeah, 2 minutes later, he turns into he's like a
leader.
Catalyst.
He's like a leader all of a sudden.
Yeah, leader. Yeah. No, it's a great video. It's a great video. We'll put the video link in the show notes.
But I think that's exactly what it seems that our theme for our show, for our rewatch show, is the fact that so much of what we claim is intentional is not intentional. We're just a machine that's being programmed.
So you do recognize you're kind of supporting my observation. I
never disagreed with it.
The
part I disagreed with was the thing that you didn't say, which is that data can be human. And what I agree with is that humans can be data. That's the part I agree with.
I see. Well, okay, but then again, I mean, if there is such a thing as a non-biological soul, then who's to say that data doesn't have one as well? If you're saying that the evidence of what you want to call the soul is not going to be visible in our biology, no matter how far we break it down, or assuming it's not, it's still, you're saying even if we can't find proof for it, you're still going to believe in it, So who's to say that data can't have it as well?
No, I think I never thought of that, but I don't have an argument against it because I don't know where this thing came from. This soul thing comes from. So maybe, if you're religious or something, you say, well, God has these souls and he places them in these bodies. But maybe it can be created spontaneously by, you get a certain amount of inputs from different things, you learn a certain amount of things, and then spontaneously this soul thing gets created. Because I don't know how a soul is created, I can't say that that's not how it was created.
This is the end of the show for this week. Thank you for sticking with us this long. The one person who might have stuck with us this long. And Maud will want to say goodbye.
Well, no, I just hope that you watched as much as you did. Maybe you skipped ahead to the end. That wouldn't be a problem either. But like we keep saying, this hopefully is a show about nothing, which means you can pop in at any time and hopefully get something out of it.
Well,
and we'll see you in the next show.
I can't stop though with that. So
why?
It's just because, you said a show about nothing, and I realized that immediately associatively think that means it's about everything. Yes, because it can be about everything. So there's a famous, not famous, but Pete Townsend from The Who has a song called "Everything Is Nothing," which he repeats in a mantra-like way to the point where it just segs into itself, where nothing is everything, everything is nothing, becomes one continuous loop. So that's we're changing the name of the channel to Nothing is Everything. And
the show about everything.
The show about everything.